Almost everyone watching this was raised to never waste food. Cook once, eat twice. Your mother probably did it, you probably do it, and honestly, it's one of the smarter habits a person can have. What almost nobody explains is that the second time you heat a food, you're running a genuinely different chemistry experiment than the first time. Same pan, same food, different reactions entirely. And for specific foods, warmed up a specific way, build compounds that the World Health Organization's own cancer research arm has formally classified as probable human carcinogens. I want to be precise about this because there's a lot of exaggerated content on this topic online. Leftovers are fine, leftovers are good. The difference between building those compounds and not building them almost always comes down to two things: the temperature dial on your stove and about 90 seconds of your time. And before you assume this is the usual "don't microwave anything" scare video, give me a minute, because the actual answer flips that expectation. Your microwave turns out to be the safest tool in this whole story, and I'll get to exactly why by the end. I'm Joshua Smith, and today we're covering 4 foods, one of which is one of the healthiest things you can put in your body, one of which is sitting in a pot in a huge share of households tonight. And the last one is the one worth worrying about most, because it's the single most reheated food on the planet, and you've almost certainly warmed it up sometime this week. Here's the one idea to hold on to before the list, because once you have it, you can work out the answer for any food in your own refrigerator, including ones we don't specifically name today. When you cook a food the first time, heat does exactly what you want it to. It breaks down tough structures, unfolds proteins so your body can actually use them, releases nutrients, and kills bacteria. That's the entire point of cooking, and it works. Then the food cools, and while it sits, it changes. The proteins have already been unfolded. Starch begins recrystallizing into a tighter structure. Fats have already been partly broken open, and any bacterial spores that survived the first round of cooking start waking up. So when that food goes back on the heat a second time, the heat is landing on something that's already been altered once. Different material, different chemistry. That second heat does 3 things the first one never did. It creates building compounds that weren't present in the food when it was first cooked and weren't there when you put it away. It compounds, meaning the first heat starts a reaction and the second heat continues working on what the first one already broke open, so the effect runs faster and further with each additional pass. And it can't undo, meaning heat kills living bacteria, but it does not destroy certain toxins that some bacteria leave behind. So a reheat can look, smell, and taste like it solved the problem while the actual issue is still sitting right there on the plate. Creates, compounds, can't undo. Every food below gets checked against those 3, and every single one has a fix that costs nothing. Food 1, spinach, and with it, the whole dark leafy green family. Chard, kale, arugula, beet greens. The good part first, because it's true and it matters. Eaten fresh, raw, or cooked, spinach is genuinely one of the better things you can put in your body. Iron, folate, vitamin K, lutein for your eyes. And leafy greens are part of why a plant-heavy diet is tied to lower blood pressure. Keep eating them. Now, the chemistry behind why reheating them specifically is the issue. Leafy greens pull nitrate from the soil and store it in the leaf. On its own, nitrate is harmless, and in some contexts, genuinely useful. It's the same compound in beets that your blood vessels convert into nitric oxide, which helps them relax and open. What changes things is warm storage. Bacteria naturally present on the leaf convert nitrate into nitrite, a more reactive form of the same element. And that conversion happens fastest in the temperature range between roughly 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the same danger zone that shows up throughout food safety guidance for very different reasons. A pan of spinach left cooling on the counter for a couple of hours is quietly building nitrite that whole time, even though nothing about how it looks or smells gives any indication that's happening. It's worth noting the same nitrate that becomes a concern here is in a different context part of why beets and beet juice get so much attention in cardiovascular research. Since dietary nitrate converted to nitric oxide under the right conditions genuinely does support healthy blood vessel function, the chemistry itself isn't the villain. The timing and temperature it happens under is what matters. Then, when that dish gets reheated, nitrite in the presence of heat and protein can form nitroso compounds, nitrosamines, one of the most extensively studied classes of chemical carcinogen that exists. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, the World Health Organization's cancer research arm, classified nitrate and nitrite specifically under conditions that lead to that internal conversion as group 2A, probably carcinogenic to humans, back in 2010. The cancers with the most consistent evidence behind them involve the digestive tract, stomach, esophagus, and colon. Worth being honest about scale here, since the goal isn't to alarm anyone. One reheated spinach dish isn't a singular event that determines anything on its own. This is the kind of small, repeated exposure that adds up over decades, which happens to be how most diet-linked cancer risk actually accumulates in the first place. The fix costs nothing. Cook the amount of greens you're actually going to eat that sitting. And if there's extra, get it into the refrigerator within the hour and eat it cold afterward. Cold spinach folded into a salad the next day keeps all the nutrition and skips the second heat entirely. The problem was never the greens. It's the warm hour on the counter and the second trip through the pan. Food 2, rice. And this one has genuinely put people in the hospital. Uncooked rice naturally carries spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus, a spore being the dormant survival form of a bacterium, essentially a seed with a hard protective shell built to survive exactly one thing: heat. Boiling a pot of rice kills nearly everything else present, but those spores pass straight through the boil untouched. Once the rice comes off the heat and sits at room temperature, falling into that same warm range, the spores wake up, multiply, and while multiplying, release a toxin called cerulide. This is where it gets genuinely serious. Cerulide is heat stable, meaning you can bring that rice back to a full rolling boil the next day, kill every living bacterium present, and the toxin will still be sitting there completely intact. This pattern is well enough known that it has an informal nickname in emergency medicine: fried rice syndrome, the classic case being takeout rice left out overnight and pan-fried the following day. Reheating creates the feeling of having sterilized the dish without actually neutralizing what's already there. In a healthy younger adult, that generally means an unpleasant few hours of vomiting. After 60, with a naturally thinner gut lining, and for people on medications like acid reducers that lower the stomach's own first line of defense, that same exposure can mean a genuine hospital visit for dehydration. And repeated low-grade irritation of the gut lining over years is something worth taking seriously as a general risk factor for digestive health as well. There's a second, quieter issue with rice too. As cooked rice cools, its starch recrystallizes into a tighter structure called retrogradation. And browning that cold, retrograded rice in a hot, dry pan is exactly the reaction that produces acrylamide, which the IARC also classifies as a probable human carcinogen, with the FDA having published formal industry guidance on reducing it in food generally. The fix, consistent with general food safety guidance: get rice into the refrigerator within an hour of cooking, spread in a shallow container so it cools quickly rather than staying warm in the center of a deep pot. Eat it within 24 hours. Reheat it until it's steaming hot all the way through rather than just on the surface, and reheat it once, not repeatedly. Food 3, cooking oil, both the bottle you're currently using and whatever oil is already inside food you've previously cooked. Vegetable oils high in polyunsaturated fat, sunflower, corn, soybean, and most generic vegetable oil blends are chemically fragile under high heat since those fats carry double bonds that act as weak points. This is really a difference in molecular structure more than anything else. Saturated and monounsaturated fats have fewer of these vulnerable points, which is a big part of why they tend to hold up noticeably better under repeated heat than the polyunsaturated oils do, regardless of how healthy they might otherwise be in a cold salad dressing. Push a fragile oil past its limit and it breaks apart, releasing a family of compounds called aldehydes. One of those aldehydes is formaldehyde, which the IARC classifies as Group 1 carcinogenic to humans, the same top category that includes tobacco smoke and asbestos. Another that shows up in overheated oil is acrolein, the compound responsible for that harsh smell of burnt oil catching the back of your throat, which the IARC moved into the probable human carcinogen category, Group 2A, in 2021. Research on repeatedly reheated cooking oils has generally found that reusing the same oil produces meaningfully more of these compounds with each additional heating pass, since the first heating already damages the oil's structure, leaving the second heating to work on material that's already partly broken down, degrading faster and further each time. This isn't only about a jar of saved frying oil either. When you take last night's stir fry or a pan of chicken thighs and drop it into a screaming hot skillet, the oil already inside that food goes through essentially the same cycle again. 3 fixes here, all free. Stop saving used frying oil. If there's a jar of it sitting around, that's worth pouring out. When warming any cooked dish in a pan, use low or medium heat, never high, since every reaction described here is temperature driven, and dropping the temperature largely prevents it from happening at all. And for stovetop cooking and reheating generally, extra virgin olive oil is a genuinely better choice, mostly monounsaturated fat, meaning far fewer of those fragile double bonds, carrying its own antioxidants, and holding up to heat considerably better than most seed oils, which runs opposite to what a lot of people have been told. Food 4, chicken, and with it every cooked animal protein, beef, pork, fish, even hard-boiled eggs. This is the one worth caring about most, simply because it's the most reheated food on the planet. A roasted chicken on a Sunday tends to become lunch and dinner for several days afterward in a huge number of households. And it's also the only one of the 4 that hits all 3 routes: creates, compounds, and can't undo at the same time. Starting with creates, cooking meat at high temperature causes amino acids and creatine within the muscle to react, forming heterocyclic amines, HCAs, compounds that form on the browned and charred surface and increase the hotter and drier the cooking gets. The National Cancer Institute maintains a public fact sheet specifically on this. HCAs are mutagenic, meaning they directly damage DNA in laboratory testing, cause tumors in animal studies. And population research has linked high intake of well-done, pan-fried, and grilled meat with cancers of the colon, pancreas, and prostate. Reheating a piece of meat in a hot pan runs that same browning reaction over the same surface a second time. Then compounds. The proteins in that chicken were already unfolded by the first round of cooking, and hitting them again with intense dry heat oxidizes them further. Dry, high heat is also the single biggest driver of advanced glycation end products, AGEs. And there's a well-known food database on this out of Mount Sinai in New York, compiled by Uribari and colleagues and published in 2010. With a finding worth remembering, cooking method mattered more than the food itself. The same chicken, broiled or fried, carried far more AGE content than that same chicken poached or stewed. AGEs are tied to oxidative stress and inflammation, and show up throughout the research on vascular disease, kidney disease, and diabetic complications. And finally, can't undo, cooked chicken is one of the easiest foods for bacteria to recolonize once it's cooled. And Staphylococcus aureus, a bacterium that lives on human skin and gets onto food through hands, produces an enterotoxin that's heat stable, meaning reheating to a safe internal temperature kills the bacteria itself while leaving that toxin behind. The single most useful reheating instruction for chicken specifically: low heat, a pan on medium-low, a splash of water or broth in the bottom, and a lid on top, effectively steaming it. Moist heat kept beneath the browning threshold means the HCA reaction never really gets going, AGEs don't form to the same degree, and the food comes out moist instead of turning into that dry, stringy, disappointing, reheated texture most people associate with leftovers. The habit worth breaking is tossing cold cooked chicken into a screaming hot dry skillet to crisp it back up. Easily one of the most common reheating habits out there, and one of the least favorable for this specific reason. On storage, standard USDA guidance applies. Get cooked poultry into the refrigerator within 2 hours of cooking, 1 hour on a hot day, and eat it within 3 to 4 days. Keeping in mind that guidance assumes a refrigerator actually running at 40 degrees or below, which is worth checking with an actual thermometer rather than assuming. It's worth being clear about how to think about all of this, since none of it is meant to induce panic. Nobody can take an exposure this small and this spread out and draw a direct line from it to any one person's diagnosis, and anyone claiming they can do that convincingly is generally trying to sell something. The more accurate and genuinely more useful way to think about cancer risk from everyday exposures like this is that it's the sum of thousands of small hits on cellular DNA accumulated across decades, most of which your body repairs without incident, some of which it doesn't. It's rarely one dramatic exposure that tells the story. It's the accumulation. Every exposure removed is simply one less item in that pile, which doesn't make for a dramatic headline, but is a genuinely accurate description of how prevention works in practice. None of this requires throwing away good food either. The lever that actually matters is the method: how hot, how quickly something cooled, how many times it's been reheated, and what it's cooked in. Which brings us to the thing worth flagging at the start of all this, and it flips a lot of the advice that's been repeated for years. Of everything in a typical kitchen, the microwave is the safest way to reheat 3 of these 4 foods, and it isn't particularly close. Health content has spent a couple of decades treating the microwave as the appliance to be suspicious of. Radiation in the name alone tends to make people uneasy, even though the actual physics involved has nothing to do with the kind of radiation that damages cells. A microwave heats by vibrating water molecules inside the food, and water tops out at boiling. So a microwave doesn't drive the surface of food up into the browning range where heterocyclic amines form, doesn't brown starch, so no acrylamide forms, and doesn't push oil past its breakdown point, so no fresh aldehydes get produced. In that same Mount Sinai AGE data, microwaving landed among the very lowest of all the cooking and reheating methods tested, well underneath broiling and frying. Microwaves don't make food radioactive, and they don't strip out nutrition either. In fact, because cooking time is so short, microwaving tends to preserve more of several water-soluble vitamins than boiling does, since boiling tends to leach them into water that usually gets poured down the drain. There's exactly one real weakness worth knowing: uneven heating, which leaves cold spots. And a cold spot is exactly where bacteria can survive. 3 simple habits fix that. Cover the food, stir it halfway through, and let it stand for a minute or 2 afterwards, since it keeps cooking a bit during that rest and the heat evens out. Do those 3 things, and a microwave outperforms a stovetop pan on every measure that matters here. Leafy greens remain the one exception, not because the microwave is unsafe for them specifically, but because the better move there is simply skipping the reheat entirely and eating them cold. Before wrapping up, one important line worth drawing, since everything described so far is the slow, cumulative version of this topic. And there's a fast version that's a genuine emergency and deserves to be treated as one. If you or someone in your household eats reheated food and develops vomiting that won't stop, diarrhea lasting more than 2 days, a fever above 102, blood in the stool, or signs of dehydration, dizziness on standing, no urination for 8 hours, a dry mouth, or confusion, that's not a wait and see situation. After 60, dehydration from a foodborne illness can turn dangerous considerably faster than it does at 40, especially for anyone taking a blood pressure medication or a diuretic, since those medications already affect how the body manages fluid balance. That's worth calling a doctor about right away, and worth going in immediately if there's confusion or an inability to keep fluids down. And if food ever smells wrong, looks slimy, or leaves genuine uncertainty about how long it's actually been sitting in the refrigerator, that uncertainty is the answer. That's the one and only case here where throwing it out is the right call. Here's the practical version: 6 things, all free, and worth thinking of as one connected system rather than 6 separate rules, since most of them are really the same underlying idea. Minimize time in the warm zone, applied to a different food each time. 1. Nothing cooked sits on the counter longer than an hour, including the time spent waiting for it to cool enough for the fridge. A shallow container with the lid off until steam stops, then straight in. This single habit removes most of the risk covered in this video across all 4 foods at once. 2. Leafy greens don't get reheated. Cook what you'll eat and turn any leftovers into a cold salad the next day. 3. Rice gets cooled fast. Eaten within 24 hours, reheated until steaming all the way through and reheated exactly once. 4. Anything warmed in a pan goes on low or medium heat with a lid and a splash of water or broth, never a hot, dry skillet. 5. Any jar of previously used frying oil gets poured out and the everyday cooking oil becomes extra virgin olive oil. 6. Use the microwave and use it properly. Covered, stirred halfway, rested for a couple of minutes afterward. None of that costs anything and none of it wastes food that's already been cooked, which was really the whole point of going through all of this in the first place. The habit of not wasting food is a good one. It just needed a small update to the method rather than being abandoned altogether. Together, those 6 habits meaningfully cut exposure to everything covered today without asking anyone to throw away a perfectly good meal. If this kind of plain explanation of what's actually happening in your kitchen is useful, subscribing and leaving a like helps more people find it, and let me know in the comments which of the 4 surprised you most. I'm Joshua Smith. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.